Clara Whitfield was gripping the cold jailhouse bars when Jonah Tate found her tears on the dirt floor. And all Mercy Junction believed those tears proved she was guilty. At sunrise, the railroad payroll had vanished. By noon, her sewing basket lay empty before a crowd, showing 3 stolen bills, a blood-stained letter, and a brass key. The sheriff called her a thief. Jonah, the railroad guard who had marched her through the depot, should have walked away. Instead, he saw that the letter carried a dead man's seal, and Clara feared another death more than her own shame. Before we begin, let me know where you are watching from. Leave your country name in the comments below. And if you love stories about courage, loyalty, and community, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next stories. The mistake had already happened by the time the afternoon train screamed into Mercy Junction. It came in hard from the east, brakes crying, wheels spitting sparks, its black engine throwing coal smoke over the depot roof like a storm cloud that had learned to crawl. Men stepped from the saloon porch to watch. Women paused outside the mercantile with flour sacks hugged to their aprons. Even the horses tied along Front Street lifted their heads as if they knew something in town had gone wrong. Clara Whitfield sat alone behind the jailhouse door, the hem of her gray dress dark with dust, her wrists marked red where the sheriff had tied them too tight. She had stopped crying once the shouting faded, but her tears had left small dark spots in the dirt at her feet. She stared at them because they were easier to look at than the window, easier than the bars, easier than the place on the floor where the sheriff had dropped her sewing basket. After turning it upside down, 3 railroad bills had fallen out, a brass guardhouse key, and 1 folded letter sealed with old brown wax, blood dried across the corner like rust. That was enough for Mercy Junction. By noon, the story was already moving faster than the train. Clara Whitfield had stolen the payroll. Clara Whitfield had been passing letters to outlaws. Clara Whitfield, who mended shirts for the depot men and took in washing from the hotel, had finally shown what kind of woman she truly was. Jonah Tate heard every word of it, because he was the man who had brought her in. He stood outside the jailhouse with his hat in one hand and his rifle in the other, looking down at the wooden step as if the boards might explain how a simple duty had begun to feel like a sin. Jonah was a railroad guard, broad-shouldered, sun-browned, quiet in a way that made people think him colder than he was. He wore a dark coat, a cartridge belt, and a silver badge stamped with the railroad company's mark, not the county's. His job was to protect trains, pay chests, freight ledgers, and any man foolish enough to think a moving rail car was easy prey. He believed in evidence. He believed in locked doors. He believed a man's first mistake was often trusting the wrong pair of eyes. That belief had kept him alive. It had not made him happy. When the payroll chest went missing from the guardroom that morning, Jonah had followed the tracks across the loading platform, past the baggage shed and into the alley behind Mrs. Bell's boarding house. There, he found Clara kneeling beside her sewing basket with blood on her sleeve and fear on her face. The key had been in the basket. The money, too. She had not run. She had not even tried. She had only looked up at him and said, "Please, Mr. Tate, not here." But the paymaster had shouted from the platform. The station agent had cried thief. Men had gathered. Jonah had done what a guard was supposed to do. He had taken her by the arm and walked her through town while the whole of Mercy Junction watched the last of her good name fall behind her like torn lace. Now, standing at the jailhouse door, Jonah could still feel the tremor in her arm. The sheriff came out, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. He had been chewing tobacco and wearing satisfaction like a Sunday coat. "She asking for a preacher yet?" Jonah asked. Sheriff Harlan snorted. "She's asking for water. Thieves always ask for something. She hasn't been tried. With stolen railroad money in her basket and a stolen guard key beside it, trial won't take long." Jonah's jaw tightened. "Let me speak with her." Harlan leaned one shoulder against the doorframe. "Railroad man wants to comfort the prisoner. I want to ask about the key. You already found it. I found it. I didn't learn how it got there. The sheriff studied him, then stepped aside. 5 minutes. Door stays open. Jonah entered the jailhouse. It smelled of old straw, damp pine, iron, and shame. One lantern burned on a wall hook, though daylight still pushed through the high window. Clara sat on the narrow bench in the cell, hands folded in her lap, her chin lifted, because pride was the only thing left she could afford. She was not the sort of woman who drew attention on purpose. Her brown hair was pinned simply. Her dress had been darned at the cuff. Her face was pale, not delicate exactly, but honest in its lines, with eyes that looked as if they had spent years learning not to ask for mercy. Jonah stopped outside the bars. Miss Whitfield, she did not answer. You should know where you got that key. Her mouth moved once before sound came. I didn't get it. It was in your basket. So was the money. That is not an answer. No, she said, looking at him at last. It is the truth. Jonah looked at her sleeve. The blood had dried stiff near the wrist. Whose blood? Her fingers curled into her skirt. Miss Whitfield, I tell you, she whispered. A boy might die before sundown. Jonah felt the words land inside him with a force he did not show. Outside, the train bell rang. Somewhere across the street, a woman laughed too loudly, nervous and eager for gossip. What boy? Clara turned her face away. The sheriff called from the doorway. Time. Jonah did not move. What boy? Clara. Her eyes flicked back at the sound of her name. He had never used it before. The one no one looked for, she said. The one they said ran off. Jonah knew then that this was not about a payroll chest alone. The boy was Benjamin Whitfield, Clara's younger brother, 16 years old, thin as a fence rail, quick with numbers, and hired 2 months before as a telegraph helper at the depot. 3 weeks ago, he had vanished. The station agent, Silas Vane, said the boy stole a pocket watch and fled west on a cattle train. The town accepted it. Poor boys were always expected to become thieves sooner or later. Clara had not accepted it. Jonah remembered seeing her at the depot every morning after that, asking for letters, asking the conductor of each train if a fair-haired boy had been seen along the line. Jonah had noticed the desperation. He had also noticed the way Silas Vane watched her. Jonah stepped closer to the bars. Is Ben alive? Clara's eyes filled again, but she did not let the tears fall. He was last night. The sheriff's boots struck the floor behind Jonah. Enough. Jonah held Clara's gaze 1 second longer. In that second, he saw what he had missed in the alley. Not guilt, terror, not for herself, for someone she loved. He turned away before his face could show too much. Outside, Mercy Junction kept moving, as if nothing holy had been broken. A dust devil spun past the livery. Children chased it until their mothers snapped at them to come away from the jail. The train unloaded crates, mailbags, and 2 soldiers bound north. Church bells rang for a funeral at the far end of town, slow and hollow. Jonah walked to the depot with the blood-stained letter tucked in his coat. He had taken it from the evidence table when the sheriff went to spit tobacco into the yard. It was not lawful. It was not wise, but neither was letting a frightened woman hang behind a door while men with clean collars told lies over coffee. In the baggage room, Jonah held the letter under the lights. The wax seal was cracked but not broken. It bore the shape of a small horseshoe pressed around a star. He knew that marked. Every guard on the South Line knew it. It belonged to Aaron Pike, a former brakeman who had turned outlaw after a winter wreck killed his wife and child. Pike had robbed 2 trains and shot 1 guard, then disappeared into the Red Hills beyond Miller's Creek, and Aaron Pike had been reported dead 6 months ago. Jonah stared at the letter until the lantern flame wavered. The station door opened behind him. Silas Vane stepped in, neat as a banker, his black mustache trimmed sharp, his vest buttons shining. He was the kind of man who never lifted a crate but always seemed tired from ordering others to lift it. "Mr. Tate," Silas said. The superintendent wired. "He expects a statement from you by tonight." "Hell, have one." "Good. The company wants this unpleasantness closed quickly." Payroll recovered. Culprit jail. No need for a wider scandal. Jonah folded the letter and slipped it back into his coat. Funny thing about quick endings, they often leave the truth behind. Silas smiled with his mouth only. Truth was in the girl's basket. "My bae. Careful, Tate. A guard who doubts his own arrest looks like a fool." Jonah reached for his hat. "I have looked worse." Silas' smile faded a little. Mercy Junction respects a man who knows which side of the bars he belongs on. Jonah walked past him without answering. By dusk, the wind had turned cold. Lanterns came alive along Front Street. The saloon piano started in fits, a bright sound trying to cover hard talk. Every window seemed to hold a face. Jonah went back to the jailhouse and found Clara standing at the bars. The sheriff was asleep at his desk, boots crossed, hat over his eyes. Jonah set a tin cup of coffee near the cell and spoke low. "Ben is alive?" Clara wrapped both hands around the cup, but did not drink. "I got a note last night, pushed under my door at the boarding house. From Ben." "No duh." "From Aaron Pike." Jonah's face hardened. "Pike is dead, then." "A dead man knows my brother's handwriting." "What did the note say?" "That Ben saw who took the missing company bonds from the express safe 3 weeks ago. He wrote it down in a letter to me, but the letter never reached me. Pike said if I wanted Ben alive, I was to come behind the jailhouse at dawn and bring the coat Ben had left for mending." "The coat you had in your basket?" She nodded. "There was a tear in the lining. Ben used to hide things in seams when he was little. I found his letter there after I reached the alley. It said Silas Vane had opened the safe." Jonah felt the room change around him. "Where is that letter now?" Clara's face broke. "I know," she said. "Someone struck me from behind. When I woke, the money and key were in my basket, and you were standing over me." The sheriff snored softly, unaware that his jail had become the center of something larger than his authority. Jonah looked toward the door, then back at Clara. "Why didn't you say this in front of the sheriff?" "Because Ben's note said if I spoke Silas Vane there, named to any lawman, Ben would be found in the creek before supper. You spoke it to me. You asked like you cared whether he lived." Jonah did not know what to do with that. For years, people had called him reliable, stern, useful, stubborn, hard. No one had ever accused him of caring, as if it were the one thing that might save them. He set his hand on the bars. "I made a mistake today." Clara's eyes searched his face. Yes, the word was plain. It cut deeper because she did not soften it. Jonah nodded once. "Then I'll make another if I have to set it right." Before dawn, the town turned against them both. It began with Mrs. Bell, who refused to send Clara's shawl to the jail, saying a decent house could not be mixed with jail dirt. Then the banker's wife told 3 women at the Mercantile that Clara had been seen speaking privately with Jonah after dark. By breakfast, the story had changed shape. Clara had bewitched the railroad guard. Jonah had stolen evidence for her. Ben Whitfield had probably been part of the robbery all along. Mercy Junction was a small town with a long memory for other people's stains. Clara heard the whispers through the open jail window. Each word came thin and sharp on the morning air. Ruin, shameless, jailbird, outlaw's woman. She sat very still, as if stillness could keep her from breaking. Jonah heard them too. He stood outside the sheriff's office with a cup of black coffee going cold in his hand, and his anger packed down tight. Anger had never been useful unless bridled. His father had taught him that with fists and scripture in equal measure. Sheriff Harlan came out and squinted at the street. "Court meets tomorrow. Judge will hear the company's charge first. Tomorrow is too soon. Evidence is simple." "No, it isn't. The sheriff turned. You got something to say? Jonah looked across the street to the depot. Silas Vane stood beneath the clock, clean, calm, speaking to the paymaster as if the world had not shifted beneath his feet. I'm saying I want her moved where? T.O. The county seat, safer holding. Harlan barked a laugh. You think I can't guard one woman? I think if Aaron Pike's name is in this, your walls won't matter. That sobered him. Pike's dead. Men keep saying that. The sheriff scratched his jaw. Railroad won't pay for a transfer unless the superintendent orders it. I take custody. You. After last night's whispers, Jonah's mouth tightened, especially after them. Harlan looked him over. You put your name beside hers. You might not scrape the mud off. I have worn mud before. By mid-morning, Jonah had the order he needed, though not the blessing. The superintendent wired permission for the railroad guard to escort the prisoner to a secure holding room at the old water stop ranch 5 miles west, where company horses were kept and a line cabin stood near the tracks. It was temporary, the wire said. It also warned Jonah that any loss of prisoner or evidence would end his employment. Silas Vane read the wire before handing it over. This is generous of the company, he said. Generous isn't the word I'd choose. Then choose careful. Miss Whitfield has already dragged one boy into disgrace. You need not follow. Jonah stepped close enough for Silas to smell the coffee on his breath. When I find Ben Whitfield, I'll ask who dragged him. For the first time, a small crack opened in Silas' polished face. Clara was brought out at noon. No one threw stones. Mercy Junction was too church-going for that, but people stood where she could see them, and their silence did what stones could not. Mrs. Bell folded her arms. The banker's wife lifted her chin. 2 boys whispered and laughed until Jonah's look shut their mouths. Clara wore no bonnet. The sheriff had not allowed it. Her face was pale under the sun, but she walked straight. Jonah helped her into the buckboard because her wrists were still sore. When his hand touched her elbow, she stiffened. You don't have to look grateful, he said quietly. I wasn't planning to. A corner of his mouth moved despite the street full of watching eyes. Good day rode west with the train tracks on their left and the prairie opening wide on their right. Dust rose behind the wheels. Telegraph poles marched beside them, wire humming in the wind. Far off, cattle moved like dark seeds across yellow grass. For the first mile, neither spoke. Then Clara said, You believe me now? I believe there is more truth than I saw. That is not the same. No, she looked at him. Why help me then? Jonah kept his eyes on the team. Because my sister once told the truth too late. Clara waited. When he did not go on, she looked ahead again. He surprised himself by continuing. Her name was Ruth. She was 17, took a job serving meals on the northbound trains. A conductor started taking liberties with her, then said she encouraged him. My father told her to keep quiet, said reputation mattered more than justice. Jonah's hands tightened on the reins. She ran. We found her 2 counties over, married to a gambler who treated her worse. She died in childbirth before she turned 19. The prairie wind rushed between them. I'm sorry, Clara said. I became a guard because rules seemed cleaner than people. And were they? He glanced at her. Until yesterday, the old water stop ranch sat in a shallow valley where the tracks curved around a rise of cottonwoods. It was not much to look at, just a barn, a corral, a windmill, a line cabin, and a water tower blackened by years of smoke. But after the jail, it looked almost kind. Jonah's aunt, May Tate, kept the place for the railroad. She was a widow with silver hair, sharp eyes, and hands that could gentle a horse or skin a snake depending on what the day required. She met them on the porch with a shotgun resting in the crook of her arm. That the prisoner? She asked. That's Miss Whitfield, Jonah said. Aunt May looked Clara over. Can you cook? Clara blinked. Yes, Mom. Can you sew? Yes. Can you tell a lie without blinking? Clara's chin lifted. Not well. Good. I've had enough smooth liars. Come in. That was how Clara Whitfield, accused thief and supposed outlaw's woman, entered the first house in 2 days where no one called her ruin. By evening, Jonah had placed her in the small back room, not locked but watched. The window had a nail driven through the sash so it could open, only a hand's width. Clara noticed but did not complain. She had no energy left for pretending insult mattered more than survival. Aunt May gave her stew, coffee, and a clean cloth for her wrists. When Clara tried to thank her, the older woman waved it away. Don't thank me until I know whether you bring bullets with you. I might. Then wash your hands before supper. Bullets or not, I run a clean table for the first time since the alley. Clara almost smiled. The smile disappeared after dark when hoofbeats sounded beyond the barn. Jonah was at the window before Clara could stand. Aunt May blew out the lamp. Outside, the yard fell under moonlight and shadow. The horses shifted in the corral. A train whistle cried far down the line, lonely as a warning. 3 riders moved near the water tower. Jonah took his rifle. Clara whispered, "They came for Ben's letter. Stay behind the stove." "I don't have it." "They might not believe that." The first shot struck the porch post and split wood over Jonah's shoulder. Aunt May fired through the window, and one rider cursed. Jonah slipped out the back, moving low along the wall. Clara crouched behind the stove, hot hammering. She could smell iron, smoke, and flour from the bread Aunt May had been kneading. Another shot shattered the front window. Then a voice called from the yard, "Give us the girl." "Take Company 1 miss 1 guard," Jonah answered from the darkness near the barn. "Come take her." The next minute broke open in gunfire. Horses screamed. Men shouted. Aunt May reloaded with hands steady as prayer. Clara could do nothing, and doing nothing nearly drove her mad. Then she heard a softer sound behind the cabin. A scrape at the back door. Clara turned. The latch lifted. She grabbed the first thing her hand found, Aunt May's iron skillet. When the door opened, she swung, with all the force shame had left in her. The man behind it grunted and fell against the jamb. He was young, bearded, and wearing a railroad brakeman's coat. A folded paper dropped from his hand. Clara snatched it up before he could reach it. He lunged. She struck him again, and he collapsed across the threshold. Jonah appeared a breath later, rifle raised. "Clara?" She held up the paper, trembling. He brought something. Jonah dragged the man inside and shut the door. Outside, the remaining riders fled west, carrying one wounded man between them. Aunt May lit the lamp. Its glow revealed mud on the drop paper and words written in a hand Clara knew better than her own. "Clara, do not trust Vane. He has me at broken spur mine. Pike is alive, but hurt. They want the letter I hid in my coat. If they say I stole, don't believe them. If you can reach the water, stop. Look under the 3rd loose board in the old tack room. I left proof there before they caught me." Then Clara pressed the paper to her mouth and closed her eyes. Jonah watched her, and the last part of his doubt died quietly. The next day did not begin with romance. It began with chores. That was how trust came to them. Not in moonlit speeches, but in work that had to be done because danger did not feed horses or haul water. One man from the night raid was tied in the barn with a bandage around his head and a temper that curdled every time Aunt May looked at him. His name was Caleb Drisk, and he had once worked as a brakeman under Silas Vane. He refused to talk. Aunt May said hunger would loosen him by supper. Jonah went to search the old tack room. Clara insisted on coming. "You are still in my custody," he said, "and you are looking for my brother's proof. You don't trust me to find a loose board. I trust you more than yesterday. That is not enough." Aunt May from the porch said, "Take the girl before she wears a hole in my floor." So Jonah took her. The tack room smelled of leather, dust, mouse nests, and old rain. Sunlight came through gaps in the boards. Saddles sat on racks. Harness hung like tired snakes along the wall. Clara knelt at once, counting boards from the door. 1, 2, 3. Jonah wedged his knife into the seam and lifted. Beneath the board was a narrow oilcloth packet. Clara reached for it, then stopped and looked at him. You open it. Why? Because if I touch it, they'll say I made it. Jonah felt the bitter wisdom in that. He opened the packet. Inside was a torn ledger page, 2 envelopes, and a small photograph of Ben standing beside another young man near the depot water tank. The ledger page bore Silas Van Neat handwriting. It listed special freight fees paid in cash under false names. The envelopes were addressed to Clara, never delivered. Both had been opened and resealed. Jonah read the first letter. Clara, I found something wrong in the express safe records. Mr. Vane keeps marking bond shipments short before they arrive. I think he is selling information to Pike's old gang. Don't tell anyone yet. I need proof. The second letter was worse. Clara, if anything happens to me, look for Aaron Pike. He isn't the man they say. Vane used his name after the wreck. Pike knows where the real stolen bonds are hidden. I am scared, but I am not running. Clara sat back on her heels. Her face looked hollow. I came every day asking for those letters, she said. Every day. Jonah folded them carefully. Silas kept them, then told the town Ben ran off. She swallowed hard. I hated Ben for 1 hour. I need you to know that. The day they said he stole the watch, I hated him for leaving me with our father's debts. I hated him for making everyone write about us. Her voice shook. Then I hated myself for believing it. Jonah crouched across from her. An hour of fear is not betrayal. It felt like one. He thought of Ruth, of all the years he spent wondering whether one different sentence from him might have changed her road. Then, let it be 1 hour, he said. Not the rest of your life. Clara looked at him as if those words had opened a door she did not know was there. Outside, cattle bawled from a neighboring pasture. The windmill creaked. Far down the track, a freight train rolled past, shaking the ground beneath their knees. For a moment, the whole world was iron wheels and thunder. When it faded, Jonah helped her stand. Her fingers rested in his hand, longer than necessary. Not long enough to be a promise, long enough to be the beginning of one. That afternoon, ranch work gathered around them. One of the company horses had torn its flank on a nail during the shooting. Jonah cleaned the wound while Clara held the animal's head and murmured softly. She had a low, steady voice, the kind that made frightened creatures believe the worst had already passed. You've done this before, Jonah said. My father kept 2 mules before drink kept him. She stroked the horse's nose. Animals forgive quicker than towns. Depends on the town. Mercy Junction does not forgive. It waits for the next mistake. Jonah wrapped the bandage. Then don't give it one. She gave him a dry look. That your comfort. That was my attempt. I needs mending. He almost smiled. You're the seamstress. A small laugh escaped her before she could stop it. It startled them both. Aunt May saw it from the porch and pretended not to. By supper, Caleb Driss was ready to talk. He sat tied to a post in the barn while Aunt May held a bowl of beans and ate them slowly in front of him. His stomach growled loud enough to shame him. All I know, he muttered, is Vane paid us to scare the girl and fetch whatever she had. Said Pike's seal was on a letter and that letter could hang him. Where is Ben? Jonah asked. Driss looked away. Aunt May lifted another spoonful of beans. Broken spur mine, Driss said. Like the note said, but Vane's moving him tomorrow night. There's a hand car hidden past Milepost 42. They'll take him to the canyon, then south. Is Pike with him? Driss nodded. Half dead. Bullet in his side. He kept the boy alive because he hates Vane worse than the law. Clara stepped forward. Why? Driss' eyes flicked to her. Because Vane caused the winter wreck. Silence fell hard. Jonah knew the wreck. Everyone on the line knew the story. A switch left wrong in a blizzard. A passenger car overturned. 15 dead, including Aaron Pike's wife and little girl. Pike had been blamed for drunkenness. He had turned outlaw after. Driss lowered his voice. Vane took money to delay maintenance on the switch. Pike found out. Vane ruined him first. Clara looked at Jonah. Then Pike is not just an outlaw. Jonah's face stayed grim. He is still a man who shot guards after the law failed him. That does not wash blood clean, no, Clara said softly. But it explains why men stop believing clean is possible. The words stayed with Jonah long after supper. That night, the storm came. Rain swept down from the north in silver sheets, drumming the roof, turning the yard to black mud. Lightning showed the water tower, the barn, the rails shining like blaze. Clara sat at the cabin table with Ben's letters spread before her, trying to match dates to ledger entries. Jonah sharpened his knife by the stove, though it needed no sharpening. And May slept in the chair with her shotgun across her lap. Clara looked up. You should rest, so should you. I can't, neither can I. The lantern between them smoked faintly. Outside, thunder rolled over the prairie. After a while, Clara said, when my mother died, she made me promise to keep Ben in school. I was 16. He was 8. My father promised too, but grief took him one bottle at a time. I sewed until my hands cramped. I told myself if Ben became something better, all of it would mean something. It still can. What if we're too late? Jonah put the knife down. Then we carry the truth back. That is not enough. No, he said. It isn't. She looked at him then, really looked, and saw the tired lines at the corners of his eyes. The grief he kept disciplined beneath his duty. You still carry your sister. His gaze dropped every day. Was she like you? No. She laughed loud, danced madly, forgave too fast. A faint, painful smile touched him. She used to steal my hat and put flowers in the band. I would have liked her. She would have liked you. That sentence warmed Clara more than the stove. The storm softened after midnight. Jonah rose to check the barn. Clara stood too. You are not coming. I am, unless you tie me. He looked at her wrists, at the fading marks there, and shame crossed his face. I won't tie you again, he said. They went together. Rain dripped from the eaves. Mud pulled at Clara's boots. In the barn, the horses shifted and breathed. Driss slept tied to the post, snoring through his broken nose. Jonah checked the knots, then moved toward the tech room. Clara heard it first. A tap, tap. Not rain, not hoop. Metal against wood. She caught Jonah's sleeve. The sound came from beneath the floor, near the far wall. Jonah lifted a lantern and crouched. There, half hidden under straw, was a trapdoor. He opened it with his rifle ready. Below, in a shallow storage pit, lay a railroad mail sack, mildewed and tied shut. Clara's hands shook as they cut it open. Inside were letters, dozens of them, months of them, some from soldiers, some from wives, some from sons sending wages home. And among them, 3 addressed to Clara Whitfield in Ben's hand. Jonah stared at the sack. Silas Vane had not only stolen money, he had stolen voices, warnings, love, last words, forgiveness, the kind of things that kept lonely people alive out west. Clara picked up one letter with her name on it, then another. Her face hardened in the lantern light. This is why Ben mattered, she said. Not because he was my brother. Because he noticed. Jonah looked at the hidden mail, then toward the dark direction of Mercy Junction. By morning, Silas Vane would know the raid had failed. By tomorrow night, Ben might be gone. The choice ahead of Jonah stood plain as a gallows post. He could deliver the evidence to the sheriff and hope the law moved faster than corruption. Or he could ride for broken spur mine without permission, risking his job, his badge, and maybe his life for a woman the town had already condemned. Clara saw the choice in his face. You don't owe me this, she said. Jonah picked up the mail sack. That is where you are wrong. Broken Spur Mine sat beyond the west ridge where the prairie cracked open into stone. By daylight, it looked abandoned. The old R-chute sagged. Sagebrush grew through the track ties. A roofless bunkhouse leaned against the wind. But through Jonah's field glass, 2 horses stood saddled under a cottonwood, and smoke lifted from the cook shed chimney. Ben was there. My bay alive. Clara lay beside Jonah on the ridge, belly pressed to warm rock, bonnet pulled low. Aunt May had wanted to come, and had cursed them both when Jonah said no. In the end, she stayed with Drisc and the evidence, promising to ride for the county judge if they did not return by nightfall. We wait until dusk, Jonah whispered. Clara shook her head. If they move him before then, if we go now, we die in daylight. My brother might die in daylight. Jonah lowered the glass. Clara. The way he said her name held warning and tenderness together. She closed her eyes. I know. Waiting was its own kind of violence. They waited through heat, flies, and the distant clank of loose tin in the wind. Jonah watched the mine. Clara watched him. When she thought he did not notice, he had given up the company badge before they left, not thrown away, not proudly cast aside, but wrapped in cloth and placed in Aunt May's Bible. I might need both hands free, he had said. Clara understood. He was no longer acting as the railroad's man. He was acting as himself. Near mid-afternoon, a rider came from the East Silas vein. Even from a distance, Clara knew him by the way he sat a horse too straight, as if posture could hide rot. He dismounted outside the cook shed. A man came out to meet him. Wade Ralston, saloon gambler and sometime freight thief, dressed in a brown coat and a black hat with a silver band. Clara's stomach turned. Wade had once asked to walk her home from church. When she refused him, he had told 3 men she thought herself too fine for working hands. Since then, he had watched her with a smile that made her choose crowded streets. Jonah handed her the field glass. Silas was angry. He slapped his gloves against his palm while Wade laughed. Then 2 men dragged someone from the shed. Ben. Clara made a sound so small, Jonah felt it more than heard it. Ben was thinner than before. His shirt torn, his hands bound. But he stood. He was alive. Another man followed, older, bearded, one arm tied tight to his side with a bloody cloth. Aaron Pike. Not dead, not well. His face looked carved from grief and fever. Silas pointed toward the ridge road. They are moving them, Jonah said. Clara was already crawling backward. Then we moved too. They had one advantage. The old mine spur still held a broken ore cart track that curved behind the bunkhouse. Jonah knew rail yards, and he knew how men watched roads while forgetting what lay rusted behind them. They descended through a dry wash and reached the rear of the ore chute as the sky began to bronze. Clara's skirt snagged on thorns. Jonah cut it free without a word. Once, his hand closed over hers to steady her down a slope. Neither pulled away quickly. Behind the cook shed, voices rose. Silas said, "The girl doesn't have the letter, or Tate would have taken it to the sheriff." Wade answered, "Then the boy knows where it is. He already told us. The coat, the tack room. Your fools failed to recover it." Pike laughed, a rough, broken sound. "You were always afraid of paper, Vane. Funny for a man who lives by ledgers." Silas struck him. Clara flinched. Jonah's eyes went cold. He leaned close to her ear. "When I move, you get Ben. What about Pike? If he can walk, take him. If he can't, he kept Ben alive." Jonah looked at her, and in that quick look she saw the struggle between rule and mercy, between the guard he had been and the man he was choosing to become. "If he can walk," Jonah said, "take him." The plan lasted all of 10 seconds. Jonah stepped from behind the shed with his rifle on Silas. "Hands where I can see them." Wade drew first. Jonah fired. Wade's gun flew from his hand, and he hit the dirt cursing. Clara ran for Ben. Silas grabbed her before she reached him, twisting her arm behind her back and putting a pistol to her ribs. "Drop it, Tate!" Jonah froze. Ben shouted, "Let her go." Silas smiled over Clara's shoulder. "You see, Mr. Tate, this is why reputation matters. No one will question it when I say the thief ran off with outlaws and you died helping her." Clara could feel the pistol shaking. Silas was not calm anymore. That frightened her more than his smile. Jonah slowly lowered his rifle. "Don't," Clara said. His eyes held hers. "I won't let him shoot you. Then he wins." "No." The word came from Pike. He stood half bent near the shed, face gray, one hand pressed to his wounded side. With the other, he held a small derringer that must have been hidden in his boot. Silas turned. Pike fired. The shot struck Silas in the shoulder. The pistol at Clara's ribs went off while tearing through the sleeve of her dress but missing flesh. Jonah moved like a released spring. He slammed Silas to the ground, kicked the gun away, and pinned him hard enough to drive the breath out of him. Ben ran into Clara's arms. For 1 second, the world vanished. There was only her brother, shaking and alive, his face pressed against her shoulder, saying, "I'm sorry, Clara. I'm sorry," over and over. She held him so tight, he winced. "Don't you ever apologize for living," she said. Wade Ralston tried to crawl toward his gun. Jonah looked at him once. Wade stopped. They tied Silas and Wade with oar rope and loaded Pike onto Silas' horse. Pike nearly fell twice. Jonah caught him the second time. The outlaw looked at him with fever-bright eyes. "I shot a guard once. I know. Mr. Walney." He was aiming at me. "That was not in the report." Reports serve men like Vane." Jonah said nothing. Pike coughed and blood touched his lip. "There's a tin box under the cook shed. Bonds, switch records, Vane's letters to the gang. Take it. My wife's name was Mary. My little girl was Rose." His voice broke. "Make somebody say they didn't die because I was drunk." Jonah's throat tightened. "I will." Pike nodded, as if that was all he had stayed alive to hear. They found the tin box. Inside was enough proof to ruin Silas Vane 3 times over. But proof did not ride by itself, and Mercy Junction was still 5 miles away with men in it who preferred easy lies. They had prisoners, a wounded outlaw, a half-starved boy, and a woman the town believed guilty. They were 2 miles from the water stop when Silas made his last play. He had been riding with his hands bound, tied to his saddle horn. At the creek crossing, his horse stumbled. Wade shouted. In the confusion, Silas slipped one hand free, with a blade hidden in his cuff, slashed the rope, and drove his heels into the horse. He bolted toward Mercy Junction. Jonah swore and turned his horse. Clara grabbed his reins. "If he reaches town first, he'll say we kidnapped him." "I know. He'll have men waiting." "I know that too." She looked toward Ben, pale and swaying in the saddle. Pike barely conscious, weight-tied and cursing. Then she looked back at Jonah. "Take the proof," she said. "I'll bring them to Aunt Mayno. You asked what I was willing to risk for Ben. This is what. Go. If I leave you, you won't be leaving me." She reached into the saddlebag and pulled out the wrapped railroad badge. Aunt May must have tucked it there before they left. Clara pressed it into Jonah's hand. "You'll be carrying me with you, not as prisoner, as witness." Jonah looked down at the badge, then at her. Something passed between them that had no proper name yet. It was not a confession. It was not a vow. It was trust standing in the open after being built piece by piece with blood, rain, letters, and hard choices. Jonah closed his hand around the badge. "Ride straight to Aunt May," he said. "Ride fast to town." He touched the brim of his hat, wheeled his horse, and went after Silas Vane. Clara watched him until dust swallowed him. Then she led Ben, Pike, and Wade toward the water stop, with the tin box tied behind her saddle and the mail sack across her lap like a sleeping child. Mercy Junction was gathering for judgment when Jonah rode in. Silas had arrived 10 minutes ahead of him, bleeding through his coat, wild-eyed and loud. He stood on the depot platform before a crowd, telling them Jonah Tate had turned traitor, Clara Whitfield had joined Pike's gang, and Ben was a thief who had helped rob the railroad. People believed him because belief was easier when it matched yesterday's gossip. The sheriff stood uncertainly near the platform. The banker muttered about hanging. Mrs. Bell held a handkerchief to her mouth, thrilled and horrified. The paymaster demanded the company's money be protected. Then Jonah rode down Front Street with his horse lathered white and his rifle across the saddle. He did not shout. That was why everyone heard him. Silas Vane is under arrest for theft, kidnapping, attempted murder, mail interference, and conspiracy in the winter switch wreck. Silas laughed too high. You hear him. He has lost his senses over a jailhouse woman. The insult moved through the crowd like a spark. Jonah dismounted. Dust covered him from hat to boots. Blood marked one sleeve where a branch had torn him during the ride. He walked to the platform and took out his railroad badge. For a moment, Clara's warmth seemed still on the metal. I arrested Clara Whitfield, he said. That was my mistake. I will spend as long as I live knowing I made it in front of all of you. The crowd quieted. Jonah turned to the sheriff. But I won't make a second mistake by letting the man who framed her hide behind your pride. Silas sneered. You have no proof? A voice from behind the crowd said. Yes, he does. Clara rode in from the west with Ben beside her. Aaron Pike slumped on a horse behind them, and Wade Ralston tied hard enough to silence him at last. Aunt May rode with them, shotgun across her lap and the tin box strapped to her saddle. No one spoke. The crowd parted as Clara came down the street. She was muddy. Her sleeve was torn from Silas's pistol shot. Her hair had fallen loose from its pins. She looked nothing like the quiet seamstress they were used to ignoring, and nothing like the ruined woman they had enjoyed inventing. She stopped before the depot. Ben slid from his horse, nearly fell, and was caught by Jonah. That single act changed some faces in the crowd. Not all. Enough. Aunt May handed the tin box to the sheriff. Open it, Harlan, unless your hands are too delicate for truth. The sheriff opened it. Ledger pages, bonds, witch records, letters in Silas Vane's hand, reports he had altered, payments he had taken, names of men hired to rob shipments after he marked them delayed, and folded in a smaller envelope, the statement Ben had written and hidden in his coat before he was taken. The paymaster went pale. Silas stepped backward. Those are forgeries. Aaron Pike lifted his head. His voice was weak but carried. Mary Pike, he said. Rose Pike. Say their names. Vane. Silas' face drained of its last color. Pike looked at the crowd. Michelle, switch broken. Took money to hide it. Then called me drunk while I buried my wife and child. The church bell began ringing then, though no one had pulled it. Later, people would say the wind moved it. Clara would always think my grief had hands. Silas ran. He made it 3 steps before Jonah caught him. This time, Jonah did not drag a frightened woman through the street. He dragged a guilty man, and the town watched the difference. At the jailhouse door, Silas fought like a cornered animal. Jonah pinned him against the frame. Look at the floor. Silas spat blood. What? Look there. Still faint in the dirt behind the bars were the dark marks left by Clara's tears. Jonah's voice dropped low enough that only Silas the sheriff and Clara heard him. That is where your lie ended. The sheriff locked Silas inside. When the key turned, Clara breathed as if she had been holding air for 2 days. The trial did not take long once the county judge arrived. Truth, when finally allowed into the room, had a way of filling every corner. Silas Vane was bound for territorial prison, Wade Ralston traded testimony for a shorter rope, though no one pitied him. The stolen bonds went back to the railroad. The missing mail was sorted on long tables in the church basement, where townspeople came with trembling hands to claim letters months overdue. Some found good news gone stale. Some found bad news they wished had stayed lost. One old man found a letter from his daughter asking forgiveness and sat in the pew until sundown, weeping into his hat. Mercy Junction learned that stolen mail could wound deeper than stolen money. Clara received apologies, not all at once, and not all well. Mrs. Bell said she had always had doubts about the accusation, which was a lie so poor even the walls seemed ashamed of it. The banker's wife brought a pound cake and could not meet Clara's eyes. Sheriff Harlan stood hat in hand and said, "I should have listened closer." Clara accepted some apologies. She refused others. Forgiveness, she discovered, was not the same as letting people step back onto your clean floor with muddy boots. Ben recovered at Aunt May's water stop ranch. He slept for 2 days, woke hungry, and asked if he still had a job. Jonah told him any railroad that did not want him was not worth serving. The superintendent, desperate to repair the company's name, offered Ben a better position and Clara a formal payment for wrongful arrest. Clara took the payment. Then she used half of it to buy the little empty dress shop beside the church. "You sure?" Jonah asked when she signed the paper. They stood inside the shop amid dust, old shelves, and sunlight falling through a dirty window. Outside, wagons rolled past. A train whistle sounded beyond the depot. "I am sure," Clara said. "It needs work." "So do I." He looked around. "Roof leaks. I know. Floor slopes. I noticed. Front step is cracked." She turned to him, one eyebrow lifted. "Are you offering help or discouragement?" "Help. Then start with the step." So he did. For 3 weeks, Jonah came whenever his duties allowed. At first, he wore the railroad badge again, because the superintendent had asked him to stay. But he wore it differently now, not as a wall between himself and the world, but as a reminder that duty without mercy was only pride in uniform. He fixed the step, Ben scrubbed shelves, and May brought curtains and criticism. Clara sewed in the back room, her hands steady again, though sometimes she would pause when keys rattled or men shouted outside. Jonah noticed. He never called attention to it. He simply found some small task near her until the fear passed. That was how love came fully to them. Not in a single bright confession, but in the way Jonah learned Clara liked coffee with too much sugar, because bitterness had filled enough of her life. In the way Clara learned Jonah hated lilies because they had been on Ruth's grave, but liked sunflowers because Ruth used to put them in his hat. In the way his silence became a place she could rest, and her courage became a light he could follow when rules no longer showed the road. One evening, as summer leaned toward fall, Clara found Jonah outside the shop hanging a lantern by the new sign, "Whitfield Sewing and Fine Mending." The gold letters were plain but proud. "You hung it crooked," she said. He stepped back. "No, I didn't. It leans left. The whole building leans left." She laughed, and the sound moved through him like first rain after a drought. He turned. Clara, something in his voice quieted her. The street was nearly empty. The last train of the day stood at the depot, breathing steam. Lanterns glowed along the platform. Somewhere, a horse stamped. The saloon piano played softly for once, as if even it had learned manners. Jonah took off his hat. "I once thought keeping my distance from people would keep me from failing them," he said. "Then I failed you from a distance of 3 feet. You said it right. Not alone." "No," she said. "Not alone." He looked toward the jailhouse at the end of the street. Its door stood closed, ordinary now, just wood and iron. But both of them remembered what had happened behind it. Tears, shame, a secret no one wanted to hear, a choice that had changed both their lives. "I don't want to be only the man who found you crying there," Jonah said. I want to be the man who walks with you anywhere after. Clara's eyes shone, but this time she did not hide the tears. Even when the town talks, she asked, let it talk. Even when I am stubborn, I counted on that. Even when I cannot forgive quickly, then I'll wait honestly. She stepped closer. And if I say I love you, Jonah Tate, it will not be because you rescued me. His breath caught. It will be because you believed me when believing cost you something, she said. Because you brought my brother home. Because you looked at my shame and did not mistake it for my worth. Jonah reached for her hand slowly, giving her all the time in the world to refuse. She did not refuse. I love you, Clara Whitfield, he said. Not for what was done to you, for what you chose after. The train whistle blew, long and low, carrying across the prairie. Steam rolled over the tracks, silver in the lantern light. Clara leaned into Jonah's arms, and for once no one on Front Street dared make their love smaller with gossip. Months later, when the first snow dusted Mercy Junction, there was a wedding in the little church with sunflowers tucked into every window. Ben stood beside Jonah, taller now, proud in his telegraph clerk's coat. Aunt May cried and threatened anyone who noticed. The sheriff rang the bell himself. Even Aaron Pike's names were spoken. Mary and Rose, written clean in the county record at last. Clara wore a dress she had sewn with her own hands. Simple cream wool, tiny blue stitches at the cuffs, no veil over her face. She wanted to be seen. Afterward, she and Jonah walked past the depot as the evening train prepared to leave. The jailhouse door stood across the street, its iron latch dark in the cold. Jonah felt Clara pause. Do you want to go another way? He asked. She looked at the door for a long moment. No, she said. Together, they crossed the street. Clara stood before the place that had held her shame and touched the wood with 2 fingers. Jonah stood beside her, not in front, not behind. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded scrap of cloth. It was from the torn sleeve she had worn the day Silas' pistol fired. She had washed it, trimmed it, and stitched one word into it with red thread. Truth. She tied it to the old latch. The wind lifted it gently. Jonah took her hand, and they walked home beneath the lanterns, past the church bells and the waiting horses, past the depot where lost letters had once vanished and new ones now found their way. Behind them, the jailhouse door no longer looked like the place where Clara Whitfield had been ruined. It looked like the place where a railroad guard had found her tears, followed the secret they guarded, and helped turn shame into love.